Trump's epic meltdown as SC clamps down on tariffs. Did India surrender too quick? The global trade battlefield has once again turned dramatic. When the United States Supreme Court signaled limits on presidential tariff powers, it didn't just spark a legal debate, it triggered a political storm. But beyond Washington's political theater, another critical question emerged. Did India surrender too quickly under American tariff pressure? This story is not just about courtrooms and customs duties, it's about power, strategy, global economics, and shifting alliances. The Supreme Court's move, a blow to executive tariff power? He imposed sweeping tariffs on China, Europe, Canada, Mexico, and even India. Most of these tariffs were justified under national security provisions, particularly Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act and Section 301 investigations. Trump's argument was simple: America had been ripped off for decades. Tariffs were his weapon to reset global trade. However, legal challenges mounted. Critics argued that Congress, not the president, has constitutional authority over taxation and trade. The Supreme Court's willingness to examine limits on executive tariff authority signaled potential restrictions on presidential power. Observers described his reaction as explosive. He accused the judiciary of undermining American sovereignty and weakening the country's negotiating leverage. But was this really about legal power or about political control? Trump's tariff strategy, America first or economic gamble? To understand the meltdown, we need to understand the philosophy. Trump's America First policy focused on reducing trade deficits, forcing companies to relocate manufacturing back to the U.S., punishing countries with high export surpluses, reshaping supply chains. His administration slapped tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars in goods, particularly targeting China. The trade war escalated rapidly between the U.S. and China, creating global market instability. But India also found itself in the crosshairs. This meant Indian exports lost duty-free access to American markets on billions of dollars worth of goods. Trump accused India of being the tariff king. On the Indian side, the government led by Narendra Modi responded cautiously. While India imposed some retaliatory tariffs on U.S. products like almonds and apples, it avoided full-scale confrontation. Why? Because India's strategic priorities were shifting. The strategic calculation: why India didn't escalate. India was facing multiple geopolitical pressures. Rising border tensions with China, growing need for U.S. defense cooperation, desire for technology partnerships, Quad alliance strengthening. India may have calculated that preserving a strategic relationship with Washington mattered more than short-term tariff retaliation. Instead of escalating, New Delhi focused on quiet negotiations. But critics inside India argued this looked like submission. Did India blink first? The Supreme Court angle: why it matters globally. If the Supreme Court limits presidential tariff authority, it changes the entire structure of American trade policy. Future presidents, including Trump if he returns, would face more congressional oversight, reduced unilateral power, longer negotiation timelines. This weakens the shock and awe tariff strategy Trump used as leverage. For countries like India, this legal shift is crucial. It reduces unpredictability in U.S. policy. Markets prefer stability. Allies prefer predictability. And India values strategic autonomy. Trump's reaction: political theater or strategic warning? Trump's criticism of the judiciary fits a broader pattern. Throughout his political career, he has clashed with courts, media, and institutions. His argument is framed as courts interfering with executive authority, judges undermining American economic power, establishment blocking America First policies. Supporters see him as fighting bureaucratic overreach. Opponents see institutional conflict. Either way, the tariff issue became symbolic of a larger power struggle in American democracy. Did India play smart or soft? Let's examine both perspectives. Argument 1. India surrendered too quickly. Critics argue India could have retaliated more aggressively. It gave up leverage by prioritizing diplomacy. It signaled weakness in trade negotiations. Domestic industries suffered export losses. From this view, India should have matched tariffs with tariffs and forced Washington to negotiate harder. Argument 2. India played the long game. Supporters of the government argue strategic defense ties with the U.S. are more important. China poses a greater threat than American tariffs. Trade disputes are temporary. Diplomacy preserved broader cooperation. India continued strengthening military and tech ties with the U.S., particularly in defense agreements and Indo-Pacific strategy. In this context, avoiding escalation may have been strategic maturity rather than weakness. The China factor. Any discussion of US-India trade must include China. The US sees India as a counterbalance to China in Asia. India sees the US as a strategic partner against Chinese expansion. This mutual interest softened trade friction. Even during tariff disputes, defense cooperation expanded. This suggests the tariff conflict was tactical, not strategic. Economic impact on India. The removal of GSP benefits hurt specific sectors: textiles, leather goods, engineering products. However, India's overall export diversification reduced long-term damage. Meanwhile, India pushed for manufacturing reforms and production-linked incentives to attract global companies relocating from China. Ironically, Trump's trade war with China created new opportunities for India. What if Trump returns? If Trump regains power and the Supreme Court limits tariff authority, his approach may change. He could push Congress for expanded powers, negotiate trade deals differently, focus on bilateral agreements, use non-tariff pressure tools. For India, the lesson is clear: US policy can shift dramatically depending on domestic politics. Therefore, diversification is key. India has since strengthened ties not only with the US but also Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia. Strategic autonomy remains India's guiding principle. Was the meltdown political strategy? The phrase epic meltdown may reflect media framing more than policy collapse. This energizes his voter base ahead of elections. Trade policy becomes campaign fuel. The bigger constitutional question. At its core, this issue touches on the U.S. constitutional balance of power. The U.S. Constitution grants Congress authority over commerce. But over decades, Congress delegated significant power to the executive branch. The Supreme Court's scrutiny reflects growing debate over executive authority. This has implications beyond trade affecting climate policy, immigration, and emergency powers. India's diplomatic evolution. India today is not the India of the 1990s. It is a major economy, a strategic Indo-Pacific power, a key defense partner of the US, a member of global forums like G20. India's response to tariffs reflected confidence, not fear. It chose selective retaliation, not confrontation. That decision aligned with broader geopolitical goals, global reactions. Other countries watch closely. If the Supreme Court curbs executive tariff power, trade wars become harder to start, markets stabilize, allies gain predictability, Congress regains influence. For global trade, this may mean fewer sudden shocks. Final analysis: who really won? Did Trump lose power? Possibly. Did the Supreme Court reassert constitutional balance? Likely. Did India surrender? Not necessarily. In geopolitics, strength is not always loud retaliation. Sometimes it is strategic patience. India avoided escalation while strengthening its long-term position. The story reflects deeper global changes. Multipolar world order, strategic balancing domestic politics, shaping global economics. Conclusion: the clash between Donald Trump and the U.S. Supreme Court over tariffs is more than a legal debate, it is a test of executive power in modern America. For India, the question of surrender depends on perspective. From one angle, it avoided confrontation. From another, it chose strategic realism over ego-driven escalation. In international politics, survival and influence matter more than headlines. As the U.S. recalibrates trade authority and global alliances shift, one thing is certain: tariffs may rise and fall, but strategic relationships endure.